Shapes can hold us still. A triangle that cannot exist. A staircase that never ends, but droplets suspended in air. They interrupt the flow of time as we feel it. This is not about clocks, but about perception. Geometry does more than form space, it frames experience. When those frames bend or break, our sense of time halts. Across illusions, architecture, frozen moments in the brain, and the vast pull of black holes, we find the same truth. Time is fragile. And sometimes it is stopped, not by force, but by shape. The Penrose triangle looks simple at first. 3 beams meet at the corners to form what seems to be an ordinary triangle. The shading and perspective make the edges appear solid, as if you could build it with wood or metal. But as soon as the eyes trace the connections, the mind hits a wall. The beams link in ways that defy 3-dimensional space. One edge seems close, then suddenly distant. The triangle closes on itself in a way that is impossible in the physical world. The brain cannot reconcile what the eyes are seeing, so the image holds attention longer than an ordinary triangle ever would. This lingering is the essence of paradoxical geometry. Shapes that cannot exist still feel real enough to trigger the mechanisms of recognition. Normally, when the eyes send signals of lines and angles, the brain uses experience to create a clear object, a chair, a house, a cup. These forms match expectations, so recognition happens quickly. With an impossible shape, the expectation fails. The brain keeps cycling, looking for closure, but never finds it. This stalled process suspends perception in the same way a computer hangs when it cannot complete a task. Escher's staircase works in a similar way. At a glance, the drawing seems to depict an ordinary structure. Figures walk up and down the steps, and the logic of stairs appears sound. But as the eyes follow the path, something strange occurs. The steps loop endlessly. Climbing never leads higher, and descending never brings you down. The top becomes the bottom, the beginning meets the end, and the cycle continues without resolution. The staircase holds the gaze, not because of motion or detail, but because of contradiction. The mind wants to know if the steps ascend or descend, yet neither option works. The result is a pause in ordinary perception. When faced with such illusions, people often tilt their heads, squint, or trace the lines with their fingers. These are attempts to resolve the contradiction, but resolution never comes. A child might look at the Penrose triangle and expect to find a trick in the drawing, perhaps a hidden fold or shadow that explains the confusion. Yet the confusion remains. Time seems to stretch while the brain circles the problem. The shape has trapped attention, and with it, the flow of perception has slowed. The effect is not confined to drawings on paper. Sculptures have been built to mimic impossible figures from certain angles. Walk around them, and you see an ordinary structure, but stand in one exact position, and the beams or steps line up into an impossible whole. In that moment, the eyes see one thing, and the brain demands another. Viewers often stop walking, step back, and stare. The sculpture has done what the Penrose triangle does on a page. It has frozen perception by refusing closure. This shows that vision is not passive. We do not simply record what enters the eyes. The brain interprets and completes patterns. It expects the world to follow the rules of space and perspective. When a pattern breaks the rules, the process stalls. The break holds the mind in place, making time feel different. An impossible figure does not pass through attention as quickly as a chair or a tree. It creates a loop where the brain continues to work but cannot move forward. Optical illusions that shift between 2 possible images hint at the same effect. In the classic drawing that can be seen as either a young woman or an old woman, the eyes can switch from one to the other. During the switch, there is hesitation, a moment where perception falters. Impossible shapes hold that hesitation and extend it indefinitely. They do not allow the brain to settle, so the act of looking continues without resolution. A simple experiment could make this clear. One group of people could view photographs of ordinary objects. They would recognize the images quickly and look away. Another group could view drawings of impossible figures. They would spend far longer trying to understand the shapes. The difference is not in the complexity of the lines, but in the contradiction built into them. The paradox stretches attention and creates the feeling that time has slowed. Architects and artists often make use of this effect. A building with unusual angles that resist quick interpretation can make people stop and look longer. A mural that bends perspective can draw a crowd because it resists the fast recognition that ordinary images allow. In both cases, geometry alone is enough to suspend the viewer in a moment. Paradoxical geometry works because it mirrors the limits of human perception. We are trained to solve puzzles and move forward, but impossible shapes resist solution. They trap perception in a loop where attention stays locked. The outside world continues, but for the person caught by the illusion, there is a pause. It is a pause not measured by clocks, but by the suspension of recognition. The Penrose triangle and the Escher staircase remind us that time can be halted, at least in the mind, by geometry that refuses to resolve. Symmetry has a strange effect on the human mind. When we look at a shape that mirrors itself, the eye feels at ease and the brain settles into balance. A butterfly's wings, each side reflecting the other, create a sense of calm. A snowflake, with its six-fold repetition, pulls attention in and holds it steady. The brain recognizes order, and that recognition produces the feeling that nothing needs to change. Time seems less urgent, as though the moment has no need to move forward. Symmetry creates the sense of timelessness because it promises stability. In art and architecture, symmetry often appears where people want to inspire awe or reflection. Walk into a cathedral and notice the arches stretching equally on both sides of the nave. The windows, the columns, and the spacing of the seats follow patterns that mirror one another. The eye drifts along the line of one arch and finds its partner on the opposite side. The brain recognizes this balance and feels suspended in a kind of visual rhythm. It is not unlike listening to a steady beat in music. The repetition does not demand movement. Instead, it holds the listener in place. Symmetry in buildings does the same for vision. It holds the gaze and with it, a pause in time. Fractals add another layer to this effect. A fractal is a pattern that repeats itself on different scales. Look at the branching of a tree. A single branch splits into two smaller branches. Each of those splits again, and the pattern continues until it reaches the twigs. The shape of the whole tree mirrors the shape of its smallest parts. The same happens in rivers breaking into streams, or lightning dividing into smaller forks. The repetition across scales creates the sense of infinity. There is no obvious beginning or end, only the same pattern unfolding again and again. When the eye follows a fractal, it falls into a cycle of recognition. The brain expects difference at each level, yet finds sameness. This repetition without limit disrupts the normal flow of perception. We are used to seeing variety that tells us where one thing ends and another begins. With fractals, boundaries blur. The viewer can keep zooming in, whether in thought or through an image on a screen, and still see the same design. The effect is hypnotic. The mind drifts, and the sense of time loosens. Artists have long used fractals and symmetry to create this sense of endlessness. Islamic tile work, for example, often shows repeating geometric designs. A single tile contains a pattern that repeats when joined with others, creating walls that seem to stretch beyond measure. Looking at such a wall, the eye cannot find a final edge to the design. The repetition suggests that it could continue forever. This creates the impression of being outside of ordinary time, caught instead in a cycle that has no start or finish. Nature produces similar effects. A seashell spirals outward in a logarithmic curve. As it grows, the spiral keeps its shape while scaling up in size. Look closely, and you see a smaller spiral within the larger one. The growth does not alter the pattern, it extends it. This sense of continuous growth without change suggests permanence. The seashell embodies both movement and stillness. It has grown over time, yet its shape resists the sense of time passing. The spiral can keep growing, in theory, without ever breaking the pattern. Fractals in clouds work in the same way. Large clouds break into smaller shapes that resemble the larger mass. Each fragment has edges that look like the whole. Pilots flying through storm clouds often describe the eerie sense that the shapes outside their window have no scale. A formation might look like a mountain, yet a moment later, it breaks apart into smaller masses that mimic the mountain shape. The mind struggles to locate size or endpoint, and this loss of scale creates the impression that the pattern has no time-bound form. Mathematics confirms what the eye already senses. Fractals like the Mandelbrot set contain infinite detail. Zoom into the boundary of the set, and the same shapes reappear, endlessly repeating. Computer animations of fractals demonstrate this vividly. As the camera zooms, the viewer sees new patterns unfold, yet each is a version of the whole. Watching such a zoom can absorb minutes or hours without awareness of time passing. The brain becomes fixed on the cycle of recognition, unable to mark the usual flow of moments. In daily life, even small encounters with symmetry and fractals can create pauses. Staring into a kaleidoscope, for example, confronts the eye with repeating patterns that shift with each turn. The pieces of glass tumble into new forms, but the structure of repetition never changes. Children often turn the scope again and again, caught in the endless transformation. The moments stretch because the mind does not measure them as progress. Instead, it feels suspended in the cycle of shapes. Another example is the experience of looking at ripples on a pond. A single stone dropped into water sends out circles that expand evenly in all directions. Each ring mirrors the one before it. The effect can last for only seconds, but while it lasts, the symmetry of the ripples creates a sense of stillness. The circles keep expanding, yet the pattern remains the same. The viewer is caught between motion and permanence, a space where time seems paused. Fractals and symmetry also shape how we perceive living things. The human body shows bilateral symmetry. Each arm and leg mirrors its partner. The face balances eyes, ears, and nostrils across a central line. This order gives comfort, but when symmetry is perfect, it can feel unsettling. Photographs that flip one side of a face to make both sides identical often look strange, almost artificial. The brain expects slight differences. When it finds absolute repetition, it pauses. The familiar rules of recognition falter, and perception holds still. Cultural practices show that humans have long linked symmetry and repetition with the eternal. Mandalas, with their circular designs radiating outward, are used in meditation. The viewer traces the repeating patterns, moving around the circle again and again. The act is not to reach an end, but to dwell within the repetition. Time feels irrelevant because the design does not progress. It only circles. The geometry becomes a tool for stepping outside ordinary perception. Symmetry and fractals create timelessness by removing change, which is the marker of time. When each part repeats or mirrors another, the brain finds no forward motion to measure. The experience becomes one of stasis, even within movement. This is why people can become lost staring at patterns in nature or art, why they may pause under a dome or lose track of minutes watching waves. The geometry creates a frame that halts the usual flow of perception and gives the sense of being outside time. Step into a cathedral, and the first thing you notice is not a single detail, but the vastness of the space. The walls stretch high above, the ceiling curves into arches that seem to float, and the symmetry of the layout pulls your gaze forward and upward. The effect is not accidental. For centuries, builders used sacred geometry to create spaces that do more than provide shelter. They shape perception. The arrangement of stone, glass, and light holds the visitor in a moment that feels removed from ordinary time. Sacred geometry refers to the use of proportions and patterns believed to reflect order in the universe. Ratios like the golden section, circles that radiate outwards, and polygons that divide space into harmonious parts are repeated across cultures. Ancient builders treated these forms as more than decoration. They believed the geometry linked the material world with the divine. For the visitor, the impact is immediate. Standing inside such a structure, the brain meets a design that feels both inevitable and beyond reach. The order is so precise that it seems eternal. That sense of eternity is what creates the pause, the slowing of time. Vaulted ceilings show this clearly. In Gothic cathedrals, the pointed arch allowed walls to rise higher than before. The ribs of the vault spread across the ceiling in patterns that meet at a central point. The eye follows these lines upward and cannot help but linger. The ribs guide vision into convergence, and the sheer height creates a delay in recognition. You cannot take in the ceiling all at once. Instead, perception moves slowly, tracing the geometry. The process of looking becomes extended, and in that extension, time feels altered. Domes work in a different but related way. In mosques, Byzantine churches, and even modern state buildings, the dome forms a complete circle overhead. It has no beginning and no end. When you stand beneath a dome, the curve fills your vision and draws your focus to the center. The circular form resists the forward pull of time because it offers no direction. It is not a line you can follow, but a loop that returns to itself. The result is a sense of timelessness. People often describe feeling small under a dome, not only because of its size, but because the geometry creates a space where normal markers of movement and change seem absent. Temples in many traditions use monumental design to achieve a similar effect. In ancient Egypt, massive columns lined long corridors, leading worshippers toward the inner sanctum. Each column bore carvings, but more striking was their repetition. Dozens of identical forms stood in rows, stretching beyond immediate vision. The rhythm of their placement slowed the pace of anyone walking between them. The architecture created a kind of visual chant, each column a beat in a measure that continued without end. Moving through such a corridor was not just walking. It was a passage where the mind adjusted to a different tempo, one that felt separate from ordinary time. Light plays a role in this perception as well. Stained glass windows in cathedrals filter daylight into colored beams. These beams fall in repeating patterns, often aligned with the geometry of the structure. The shifting play of light is slow, tied to the sun's movement, not to the clock on the wall. Visitors sitting quietly in a pew may lose track of time as the light drifts across the floor. The combination of symmetry, height, and filtered illumination creates an atmosphere where the usual flow of hours and minutes seems less important. The use of sacred geometry is not limited to religious structures. Secular monuments and civic buildings borrow the same principles. The United States Capitol, for example, uses a large dome to convey permanence and authority. The geometry is not meant to transport visitors to the divine, but it still works on perception. The repetition of columns, the symmetry of the wings, and the height of the dome all produce a sense of stability that feels outside of ordinary time. People entering such a space are meant to feel the weight of continuity, the impression that the institution stands beyond the changing present. Consider the Taj Mahal. The structure's dome, its mirrored minarets, and the symmetry of the gardens create an impression of balance that feels eternal. The white marble reflects light differently throughout the day, yet the geometry holds steady. Visitors often describe the experience as dreamlike, not because the building hides its structure, but because the order of the design resists the usual sense of passing time. The balance pulls attention away from the moment and toward the idea of permanence. The human response to monumental design can be explained in part by how perception processes scale. When faced with an object too large to take in at once, the brain slows. Recognition is delayed. In a small room, you can glance and understand the space immediately. In a vast hall with vaulted ceilings or repeating arches, the eye must travel slowly. That delay feels like a suspension. Combined with geometry that reinforces order, the effect becomes more than visual. It becomes a change in how time is experienced. Across cultures, builders recognized this and used it deliberately. The repeating colonnades of Greek temples, the the mandala layouts of Hindu temples, the central domes of Ottoman mosques, all work to hold attention in patterns that feel beyond the present moment. The visitor does not simply see these spaces. They inhabit a design that alters perception. The pause in recognition, the suspension in symmetry, and the vast scale together create the sensation of time standing still. Architecture has the power to direct the mind, not through motion, but through form. By shaping space with sacred geometry, builders shaped perception itself. The arches, domes, and monumental designs act as tools to suspend ordinary experience and create the impression of timelessness. For those who enter, the building becomes more than a structure. It becomes a place where geometry changes the way time is felt. Simon Baker stood in the shower one morning, expecting nothing unusual. The water flowed from the shower head, steam filled the air, and the daily routine unfolded as always. Then, without warning, something in his brain changed. He later learned that an aneurysm had disrupted normal activity in his visual cortex. At that moment, what he saw was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The stream of water no longer appeared as a continuous flow. Instead, each droplet seemed to hang in the air, perfectly still, as if the world around him had paused. The droplets formed crystalline shapes, hovering midair, each one frozen in place. This strange event did not last forever, but for Baker, it was vivid and unforgettable. He described it as like a scene from the film The Matrix, where bullets slow to a crawl and the viewer can watch each fragment of motion unfold. What for most people is a special effect created by cameras and editing, for him was a direct experience. The perception of time itself seemed to stop. The water droplets became objects arranged in space, rather than points in a flowing sequence. The geometry of their arrangement formed a tableau, a grid of suspended motion. What makes this account striking is how ordinary it was at its start. A shower is not a place where people expect profound experiences, yet it became the stage for a moment where perception and time fractured. The water did not change its behavior. Physics carried on as usual. Gravity pulled droplets downward, the pressure pushed water outward, and the air moved as always. What changed was the way Baker's brain processed those signals. The smooth continuity of motion, something most of us take for granted, dissolved into stillness. The result was a geometry that seemed accidental but had a powerful effect. In normal vision, the brain does not see each instant separately. The visual cortex stitches together frames of input into a seamless flow. This process is so efficient that we rarely think of it. We do not notice the gaps between frames, nor do we feel the construction of time in perception. Baker's aneurysm interrupted that process. Instead of a fluid stream, his mind delivered a series of static frames. It was as though the glue that held time together had fallen away. Each droplet became its own still picture, hanging in space, disconnected from what came before or after. The geometry of that moment mattered. Droplets from a showerhead form in patterns. Some cluster, others scatter. Their surfaces bend light, distort shapes, and shimmer. Normally, these details pass unnoticed because motion keeps them from being fixed in view. But when the motion froze, the droplets revealed themselves as independent objects. Their placement became spatial rather than temporal. The shower turned into a gallery of suspended glass beads, and Baker stood at the center of it. The power of this experience comes from the brain's reliance on motion to mark time. Without motion, the sense of time weakens. By halting motion in perception, Baker's brain created the illusion that time itself had stopped. What he saw was not just water in the air. It was a structure that denied progression. The droplets no longer moved forward. They became the shape that stopped time, born not of design, but of a breakdown in neural function. Baker later reflected on how sudden and local the change had been. One minute he was fine, the next he was in a different reality. The rest of his senses carried on. He could hear water striking surfaces, feel steam, and sense warmth. Yet his vision contradicted all of that. His eyes gave him a frozen world. This mismatch between senses deepened the effect. His brain could not reconcile the evidence. In that gap, the experience of timelessness emerged. This case shows how fragile perception can be. The continuity we assume in daily life depends on the smooth working of neural circuits. When they falter, even for a moment, reality can fracture. The geometry of droplets hanging in air was not special in itself. It was the disruption that turned them into an extraordinary sight. The accidental shapes became symbols of stillness. What normally vanishes in the blow of movement became distinct and lasting. There are parallels to how cameras capture the world. A high-speed camera can record thousands of frames per second. Played back in slow motion, these frames reveal details invisible to the naked eye. The arc of a drop, the splash of impact, the ripple of water on skin. For Baker, no camera was needed. His brain itself performed the slow-motion capture, but instead of playback, it offered stillness. Each droplet was not in motion at all. It was locked in a frozen pose. Other accounts of altered time perception share this quality. People in accidents sometimes describe moments where cars move slowly or where sound and sight separate. Athletes report that during critical plays, the world seems to decelerate, giving them more time to act. These are not changes in physics, but changes in processing speed. The brain works faster or stitches frames differently, creating the impression that the world has slowed. In Baker's case, the process broke down so completely that motion ceased altogether. The geometry of his frozen droplets resonates with ideas from art and science. In art, still-life paintings arrange objects to hold them in eternal pause. The fruit does not rot, the glass does not spill, the candle flame never dies. In science, we describe event horizons of black holes as boundaries where time itself halts from an outside view. Baker's shower was neither art nor astrophysics, yet it touched the same theme. Shapes in space became untied from time, offering a glimpse of eternity in the most mundane of settings. The case also highlights how much of our experience rests on construction rather than raw input. The eye receives light, but the brain builds time. When that building falters, the world transforms. Baker's description of droplets frozen midair illustrates how perception is not passive but active. It interprets, organizes, and smooths. When those processes fail, the ordinary becomes impossible. What happened to Simon Baker was temporary, and he recovered. Yet the memory of that moment stayed with him. It was more than an odd visual glitch. It was a lived example of how fragile and strange perception can be. The accident of geometry, the pattern of droplets arrested in midair, became a personal image of time undone. It shows that the shape that stops time may not come from design or intention. Sometimes it arises by chance. When the machinery of the brain reveals the frames beneath the flow, the human brain depends on motion to anchor the flow of time. When we watch the world around us, we do not see one still picture after another. We experience a continuous stream of movement. This feeling of smoothness comes from a part of the brain known as Area V5, sometimes called MT, located in the visual cortex. Its job is to track motion and give coherence to what would otherwise be a jumble of still frames. Without it, the world would look like a slideshow. The work of Area V5 is so automatic and constant that we rarely notice it. Yet, it is one of the key reasons our sense of time feels stable. To understand this better, it helps to think of a film projector. A strip of film is not the continuous recording of motion. It is made up of individual frames, each one a snapshot of a single moment. When the frames pass quickly through the projector, at about 24 per second, the eye and brain blend them together. What we see is not a series of stills, but a flowing picture. The same principle applies to perception. The retina receives light in pulses, and the brain collects these into separate packages. Area V5 stitches the packages together, smoothing over the gaps. This construction of continuity creates the impression that the world moves without interruption. When this system falters, the illusion is revealed. People with injuries or seizures that affect Area V5 sometimes describe the world as jerky or fragmented. Motion no longer flows. Instead, it breaks down into a series of freeze frames. A person walking across a room might appear in one position, then another, with no visible steps in between. Water pouring from a tap might look like beads dropping in stages rather than a single stream. The brain's normal glue, the work of filling in the intervals, has failed. What remains is the raw input, the frames themselves. Experiments in neuroscience have shown how precise this process can be. By stimulating or disrupting area V5, researchers can cause subjects to misjudge motion or lose the ability to see it altogether. In some cases, people can still identify objects, shapes, and colors, but the objects seem frozen or move in abrupt jumps. This condition, called achinotopsia, is rare but revealing. It shows that motion is not a property of the outside world alone. It is also a product of neural circuits that interpret change over time. Without those circuits, the brain delivers static pictures rather than living sequences. Everyday life offers small glimpses of this frame-based reality. Consider the spinning wheels of a car filmed under artificial light. At certain speeds, the wheels appear to stand still or rotate backward. This effect happens because the sampling rate of the camera aligns with the motion of the wheel. The same can occur in human vision when environmental conditions or brain timing line up in unusual ways. The wheel does not stop moving, but our perception translates it into freeze frames that suggest it has. This stroboscopic illusion reminds us that perception is constructed, not direct. The reliance on frames becomes clearer under altered states. Psychedelic drugs, for instance, often distort motion. Users sometimes report that objects leave trails, as though multiple frames overlap without merging. Others describe the world as breaking into stills that flicker or stack on top of each other. These experiences point to disruptions in the timing of visual processing. The glue does not disappear entirely, but it weakens, letting the seams between frames show. Athletes in extreme focus also describe something similar. During a crucial play, they feel as if the ball slows down, giving them more time to act. In such moments, the brain's stopwatch speeds up, processing more frames per second than usual, which makes external events feel stretched. What these examples share is the delicate balance of timing. The brain cannot record every millisecond of reality. Instead, it samples, compresses, and organizes. Area V5 plays a central role in that process by comparing one snapshot to the next and calculating the difference. That calculation creates motion. When it works, time flows. When it falters, the flow breaks. The freeze frames that result are not errors in the outside world, but revelations of the brain's inner machinery. One striking case comes from a patient known in medical literature as LM, who suffered damage to area V5. She could see objects clearly when they stood still, but when they moved, her world turned chaotic. She described pouring tea and seeing the liquid as a frozen column, with no way to judge when to stop. She struggled to cross streets because cars appeared frozen at one point and then suddenly at another, with no visible transition. Her experience was like living inside a film reel that skipped frames, denying her the smoothness of motion. For LM, the loss of the brain's stopwatch meant the loss of a basic sense of time. This fragility is what makes motion perception so profound. We assume time exists outside us as a steady river, but much of what we feel depends on neural construction. The film projector analogy is useful, but the truth is even more complex. The brain does not simply play back frames in order. It anticipates, fills gaps, and smooths edges. It predicts where a moving object will go and corrects errors on the fly. Area V5 is central to this predictive work. Without it, the brain cannot weave the frames into a fabric. Time then appears not as a stream, but as a sequence of isolated shapes. Consider again the idea of freeze frames. In film, a freeze frame holds a single image on the screen, breaking the illusion of motion. It forces the viewer to look closely at one moment, removed from flow. When the brain itself produces freeze frames, the effect is similar. Perception halts. The ordinary rhythm of time is suspended. Instead of fluidity, there is geometry. The arrangement of objects in space, captured mid-action. A runner's foot hovers above the ground. A bird's wing hangs mid-flap. A drop of water remains unfallen. Each becomes a still shape that denies the passage of time. The notion of a brain as a film projector carries weight here. Just as a projector can jam, leaving a single frame on screen, the brain can stumble, leaving perception caught on one picture. In both cases, the illusion of motion falls away, and what remains is the bare structure. One image, one shape, one frozen piece of time. These moments remind us that the experience of time is not inevitable. It is stitched together by fragile systems that can falter, revealing the stillness beneath the flow. The freeze of time is not limited to rare medical conditions or laboratory cases. It appears in daily life, in tricks of the eye, in altered states, and in sudden emergencies. One of the clearest everyday examples is the wagon wheel effect. A spinning wheel, whether on a cart, a bicycle, or a film reel, sometimes appears to stop or even rotate backward. The illusion occurs because of the way the brain samples visual input. If the spokes of the wheel line up with the rate at which light flickers, or with the sampling rate of the eye under certain lighting, motion breaks into discrete steps. The wheel does not actually halt, but perception frames it as frozen. This simple case shows how a mechanical rhythm in the outside world can clash with the brain's rhythm of perception, producing the sense that time has paused. Stroboscopic lighting makes the effect even sharper. In a club, a dancer lit by a strobe appears to move in jerks as though held in one pose after another. The light interrupts the stream of visual data, giving only snapshots. The brain tries to glue them together, but the gaps are too wide, and motion becomes a series of freezes. The experience can feel eerie, like watching someone flicker in and out of existence. The same principle explains why film and television can create the illusion of movement with only 24 frames per second. If the rate dips too low, the illusion fails, and the freeze between frames becomes visible. Drugs can also shift the brain's sense of timing. Psychedelics such as LSD often produce visual trails where a moving object leaves behind overlapping images. A hand waving across the room seems to multiply, each position visible at once. The effect comes from a change in how frames of perception overlap. Normally, the brain erases the past frame as it updates the present. Under psychedelics, the erasure slows, leaving older frames to linger. The result is a stack of moments layered together, motion transformed into a shape that contains both past and present at once. Instead of flow, there is accumulation and the impression of time thickening or stopping. Other altered states reveal the same principle in different ways. Some people report that in dreams, motion appears discontinuous, as though events skip forward like a broken reel of film. Others describe meditation as producing an effect of timelessness, where breathing or a mantra anchors awareness and the passage of time fades. In both cases, the flow of perception is reshaped. Instead of steady forward motion, the mind experiences freezes, elongations, or erasures of time. The most dramatic freezes occur in crises. Accident survivors often describe the world slowing down in the seconds before impact. A driver swerves and the car skids. In that instant, time seems to stretch. The driver sees each fragment of broken glass glinting in the air, each twist of the steering wheel, each movement of the body. Psychologists have studied this effect and found that the external world does not actually slow. Instead, the brain accelerates its processing. Under stress, the release of adrenaline sharpens attention and increases the number of frames the brain can handle per second. Thought speeds up, but the outside clock remains the same. The mismatch creates the feeling that the world has frozen, giving the person a sense of extra time to act. Athletes experience a related phenomenon during moments of peak performance. A baseball player facing a fast pitch sometimes reports that the ball looks larger and slower than normal. In reality, the pitch moves at nearly 100 miles per hour, but the player's brain, trained through practice, processes the ball's trajectory with such speed that it creates more perceptual frames. The ball seems suspended in the air, and the batter has the sense of more time to swing. Pilots in high-speed maneuvers also describe moments when motion outside the cockpit appears to pause, as though the aircraft hangs still in the sky. In both cases, the freeze does not mean the world has changed. It means the mind has shifted gears, operating at a faster clock speed than usual. Military research into high-stress training has documented similar effects. Soldiers under fire often say that each second felt like a minute. Their memories of the event are unusually detailed, suggesting that the brain recorded more frames during the period of danger. Later, when recalling the event, those frames stretch the timeline, making the moment seem frozen or extended. This shows how time perception depends on both immediate processing and later reconstruction. The brain that speeds up in crisis creates a longer, denser memory, which reinforces the sense that time slowed or stopped. The freeze effect demonstrates the fragile balance between external events and internal processing. Time in the outside world moves at a steady pace, measured by clocks and physics. But time in the mind depends on how many perceptual slices the brain creates and how it glues them together. When the rhythm changes through illusion, drugs, meditation, stress, or training, the flow shifts. A wheel seems frozen. A hand leaves trails. A car crash stretches into minutes. In each case, the same principle applies. The brain constructs time from frames, and when the construction changes, time itself appears to halt. These experiences highlight the difference between physical time and lived time. A physicist's clock never pauses. A wheel's rotation can be measured without illusion. But the mind does not track the clock directly. It relies on perception, memory, and processing speed. When those change, time can freeze. What remains in those frozen instants are shapes, droplets hanging in air, spokes aligned in stillness, a baseball hovering in space. These are not tricks in the outside world, but artifacts of how the brain turns snapshots into flow. When the flow stutters, the shapes take over, and time itself seems to stop. In physics, black holes stand as one of the clearest examples of geometry reshaping time itself. When matter collapses under its own weight, space curves so sharply that ordinary rules fail. Alex Gardner, a theorist who sought to understand these curves, used triangular diagrams to map spacetime near a black hole. His choice of geometry was not just stylistic. The triangle became a way to show how past, present, and future might coexist in a single shape. Rather than follow in sequence, in these diagrams, time was not a flowing river, but a folded surface, where the straight lines of cause and effect bent back upon themselves. To grasp why this matters, it helps to consider how we normally think about time. On paper, it looks like a line, the past on the left, the future on the right, and the present as a moving point that slides forward. Black holes demand a different picture. Near the event horizon, the boundary beyond which no signal escapes, the line warps. Light itself cannot climb out. If light cannot, then the signal of time also struggles. Gardner's triangular geometry shows this by placing the horizon as one side of the shape, cutting off paths that would normally move forward. What was once a line of progression becomes a wedge of possibilities, bounded by geometry rather than sequence. At the event horizon, time appears to stop. To an outside observer, watching matter fall inward, the object slows as it approaches the horizon, never quite crossing. Photons emitted from the surface take longer and longer to arrive, stretched into longer wavelengths until they fade. From far away, the falling object freezes in place, suspended at the edge. Inside the horizon, the story is different. The object does cross, but there, space and time trade roles. The inward direction becomes inevitable, like time marching forward, while the usual flow of time may appear as just another spatial coordinate. Gardner's triangles capture this by arranging past, present, and future within the same region, showing them not as separate but as layers folded together. One can see the parallel with perception in daily life. Just as the brain may freeze motion into still frames when its stitching process falters. Black hole geometry freezes events into stillness for a distant observer. In both cases, the flow halts, not because reality itself ends, but because geometry frames the experience in a new way. The shower droplets suspended in Simon Baker's vision became a shape that stopped time for him. The matter suspended at the horizon becomes a shape that stops time for us. The triangle diagram makes this connection clear. for it shows how a shift in the angle of geometry alters what counts as present or future. The triangular form also suggests coexistence. Within its boundaries, world lines that represent different observers intersect in ways that defy ordinary sequence. One observer may see a future event as already included in the shape, while another may still be in what feels like the present. The triangle holds both views at once. In that sense, it resembles a crystal, with multiple facets catching the same light. Each facet reflects time differently, but all belong to the same geometry. Gardner's insight was that the black hole forces us to accept this multiplicity. What looks like a single unfolding of time outside may fragment into a complex coexistence of states within. The concept of inverted spacetime makes this even more striking. Inside the black hole, velocities faster than light may become part of the geometry, not forbidden as they are outside. Faster-than-light paths can make events appear reversed, like reality collapsing toward a big crunch. Slower-than-light paths might stretch forward, like glimpses of future travel. The triangle shows how both can exist in the same structure, depending on the observer's speed and trajectory. This means that the geometry itself decides how time is perceived. Just as the brain's internal stopwatch can alter the flow of moments, the black hole shape dictates whether time halts, reverses, or accelerates. A practical example lies in how scientists use Penrose diagrams, of which Gardner's triangles are a variant. These diagrams condense the infinite stretch of spacetime into a finite shape, allowing past and future infinity to be drawn on the same page. In such diagrams, the horizon becomes a diagonal line, and the singularity inside the black hole forms another boundary. All paths that enter bend toward the singularity, unable to escape. The triangular shape is not arbitrary. It expresses the causal structure of spacetime, the rules about what events can influence others. By studying the angles and intersections, one can see that for anything crossing the horizon, the singularity lies ahead in time as surely as tomorrow lies ahead for us. But for the distant observer, the crossing never occurs. Both truths hold, contained within the geometry. The triangular form, then, becomes more than a diagram. It is a picture of time's fragility. Outside the horizon, clocks tick normally. Inside, they tick toward an unavoidable end. At the boundary, time appears to stall. To understand this, we rely not on intuition, but on geometry, for only the shape reveals the hidden order. Gardner's work showed that geometry can unify contradictory experiences: the halt of time at the edge, the flow of time inside, and the infinite stretch outside. What would seem impossible to reconcile in narrative becomes clear when drawn as a triangle. This echoes older traditions where triangles symbolize timelessness. In religious art, the triangle often stood for eternity, its three sides suggesting a unity that existed outside linear sequence. Gardner's physics diagrams offer a scientific version of that idea. They show that when spacetime bends into extreme forms, time ceases to be a line and becomes a closed, bounded shape. Within that shape, the past, present, and future are not separate stretches, but interwoven faces of the same structure. Black holes reveal this not only in theory, but also in observation. Telescopes capturing light near the event horizon record distortions where photons orbit the hole before escaping. The images show rings of light that linger, circling endlessly before fading. These rings are another kind of freeze, a geometry where photons remain suspended. They are physical proof that spacetime near a black hole produces shapes that alter the flow of time. To look at the ring is to see time caught in orbit, neither flowing forward nor vanishing, but hanging in an eternal loop. When Gardner drew triangles of spacetime, he was not simply abstracting equations. He was giving a visual form to an idea as strange as it is real. That time can be stopped or reshaped by geometry itself. The black hole stands as nature's own paradoxical structure, a cosmic Escher staircase where forward and backward lose their usual meaning. In that geometry, the shapes themselves become the agents of time suspension, just as much as any illusion or perceptual trick in the human mind. The triangle holds it all together, a reminder that time does not always flow, but sometimes freezes into form. Inside a black hole, the rules of space and time no longer match what we know outside. Crossing the event horizon is like stepping into a domain where the structure of reality has been inverted. Physicists call this inverted spacetime. It is not a metaphor, but a shift in geometry so deep that the axes of space and time exchange roles. What once counted as a distance becomes a flow of time, and what once counted as time becomes a direction in space. The geometry that emerges inside this region does not simply alter speed or gravity. It reshapes how an observer experiences the order of past, present, and future. In ordinary space, the speed of light acts as an ultimate boundary. Nothing can travel faster, and this rule preserves the familiar sense of cause leading to effect. Within the inverted space of a black hole, the geometry bends so steeply that paths faster than light are no longer forbidden. Instead, they take on new meaning. An observer who finds themselves moving faster than light in this geometry would not feel as if they were simply breaking a rule. They would perceive time itself running backward, events unfolding toward a collapse rather than a progression. To them, reality would resemble a big crunch, where the universe narrows and folds into a final end. On the other hand, slower than light motion in this inverted domain yields the opposite perception. Instead of collapsing toward an end, time stretches forward. Each step or movement brings with it the sense of traveling into a vast future, as though one were riding the first expansion of the cosmos after the Big Bang. What defines this difference is not the intrinsic nature of time, but the relationship between velocity and geometry. Inverted spacetime sets the stage, but the speed of the observer decides whether the play they witness runs forward, backward, or pauses altogether. This idea sounds abstract, but we can think of it by using film as an analogy. Picture a strip of film with frames arranged in sequence. In normal space, the projector runs at its steady pace, and we see motion. Inside a black hole, the projector itself has been flipped. Run the film at one speed, and the sequence appears forward. Run it at another, and the film plays in reverse. The frames are the same, but the direction of experience changes. The triangle diagrams of Gardner show this by folding spacetime so that both directions lie within the same shape. Whether you move toward one side or the other, you feel either a universe rushing to collapse or one expanding into infinite future. A human mind placed in such a region would face a paradox. Consciousness depends on the sequencing of events, on memory of what has passed, and expectation of what comes next. If geometry decides that next is collapse, then memories themselves might appear to lead backward. If geometry sets next as expansion, then the future floods ahead. The difference is not in the content of the mind, but in the shape of spacetime guiding how that content lines up. Gardner's work emphasizes that time is not absolute, but contingent on geometry plus velocity. It is the combination that frames perception. One can find echoes of this even in less extreme settings. Pilots in high-speed maneuvers sometimes report distortions of time, describing seconds that stretch out or collapse. Their brains are not inside a black hole, but velocity and the pressure of acceleration alter their perception of flow. The same occurs in crises, where thought accelerates and the outside world appears to freeze. These are hints that the brain, like spacetime, ties its experience of time to the balance between speed and structure. The black hole magnifies this to a level where perception itself may become unrecognizable. If one were to map these effects, the diagram would show inverted triangles, with one side marked by faster-than-light paths collapsing toward a crunch, and the other marked by slower-than-light paths expanding toward a future. At the base lies the horizon, the point of no return. Crossing it means entering a space where the arrow of time is no longer singular. The triangle holds both directions, forward and backward, as valid outcomes depending on the motion taken. For an outside observer, nothing crosses. The view freezes at the edge. For the traveler, inside paths lead to contradictory flows of time, both contained in the same geometry. To make this clearer, consider an imaginary astronaut falling through the horizon. If she drifts slowly, under the limit of light speed, her perception is of a future rushing open. Space unfolds, and time stretches forward, leading inevitably toward the singularity, the ultimate endpoint. If instead, her path bends in such a way that her motion exceeds the speed of light in this geometry, her experience would invert. She would not feel pulled into a future, but compressed into a past collapsing inward. Every event she perceives would seem like a step back toward origin, a universe shrinking rather than expanding. Both scenarios exist within the same inverted spacetime, governed not by choice, but by geometry and speed. This duality forces us to rethink what we mean by time travel. Popular culture imagines machines or wormholes carrying us backward or forward. But in the physics of black holes, time travel is not a product of machines, but of geometry. The shape of spacetime, once inverted, produces perceptions of reversal or acceleration without violating the deeper structure of relativity. No rules are broken. Instead, the rules bend into forms we rarely see. Gardner's diagrams are attempts to capture this, not in words but in simple geometric figures that show how one structure contains both collapse and expansion, both crunch and bang. From the outside, we can only speculate. No signal returns from beyond the horizon to confirm what happens. But the mathematics, consistent with general relativity, suggests that inverted space makes such perceptions unavoidable. It may not matter whether anyone is there to witness it. The geometry itself dictates the options. The shape of spacetime, coupled with velocity, decides the direction of time's arrow. This is why Gardner saw the triangle as a powerful tool. It is a map not of physical objects, but of how time itself rearranges under extreme curvature. The notion that faster-than-light paths could mean backward time and slower-than-light paths forward time unsettles our ordinary sense of causality. Yet it parallels what we already know from relativity. Motion alters perception of time. Astronauts moving near light speed age differently from those at rest. Clocks tick slower. Extend that principle into the inverted domain of a black hole, and the effects deepen until forward and backward lose their fixed meaning. Geometry frames perception, and velocity determines its direction. The shape that stops time, in this context, is not a droplet or an illusion, but the triangle of inverted spacetime. Within its sides, time can appear frozen, reversed, or extended, depending on how one moves. This shows us that time is not a single stream, but a relationship between motion and structure. Inside the horizon, that relationship becomes the defining feature of reality, turning speed itself into the key that unlocks different visions of time. At the edge of a black hole lies a boundary that divides what can be seen from what is hidden. This boundary is called the event horizon. It is not a wall of matter or a visible surface. It is a curve in space-time itself, a threshold where the pull of gravity grows so strong that not even light can escape. The event horizon marks the point at which all paths forward bend inward, leading only to the singularity. From the perspective of an outside observer, the horizon takes on a strange and haunting quality. Time at that boundary appears to freeze. Objects that fall toward it seem to slow down, their motions stretching into longer and longer intervals until they appear to stop altogether, suspended in place. To understand why, consider what it means to watch something fall into such a region. When light tries to escape from the horizon, it climbs against the strongest gravitational field in the universe. Each wave of light loses energy, becoming redder and weaker. As the object approaches the horizon, the signals it sends outward take longer and longer to reach an observer. They spread apart like echoes that fade into silence. Eventually, the object appears frozen on the edge, dimming until it vanishes. To the observer, the boundary acts like a frame that holds the image in place forever. The person or object falling in does not share this experience. To them, time continues, and they cross the horizon without noticing anything unusual at that exact moment. But for the outside witness, the image never moves past the edge. It stays fixed, as though spacetime itself has imposed a permanent pause. The event horizon is therefore the most literal example of a shape that stops time, not in the sense of perception only, but in the fabric of reality as it is revealed to those who remain outside. The effect is not far from what happens in the brain when perception freezes. In Simon Baker's case, droplets of water seemed to hover in air, frozen mid-fall. His brain could no longer stitch frames into motion, and so he saw only stillness. The event horizon produces a similar illusion on the cosmic scale. Light, which carries the information of movement, becomes stretched and delayed until the sequence breaks down. Just as the brain's frame stitching fails in neurological events, spacetime's geometry fails to deliver frames to an observer beyond the horizon. The result is the same, a snapshot effect, where time no longer flows but sits in a single frame. This comparison highlights how geometry shapes experience. In the brain, the geometry of neurons and the timing of electrical signals determine whether we see motion or stillness. In space, the geometry of curved spacetime determines whether we see an object move or freeze. In both cases, the interruption does not erase reality itself. The droplets still fell, the object still crossed the horizon, but perception, framed by geometry, halts before the motion can complete. We can think of this by imagining a clock strapped to the side of a spacecraft falling toward a black hole. From inside the craft, the hands tick as usual. From the outside, however, the ticking slows. Each movement of the hands takes longer to register, and the light that carries the image grows weaker. Soon the hands appear stuck, forever pointing to one moment in time. The frozen clock becomes a symbol of the horizon's power. It demonstrates how time, as seen from one point of view, can stop altogether. This boundary plays a role similar to those shapes that artists and architects have long used to produce feelings of timelessness. In a cathedral, a dome seems to float without weight, its geometry suspending space. At the horizon, geometry suspends time itself. Both create awe, one through design and the other through nature. The difference is scale. The horizon is the ultimate structure, built not by human hands but by gravity itself. The frozen image at the horizon also recalls the wagon wheel illusion in vision science. When a wheel spins under certain lighting, the spokes appear to stop or even reverse direction. This happens because the brain receives frames at a rate that misaligns with the motion. The horizon imposes a similar misalignment, but on cosmic signals. The intervals between frames of light stretch until they no longer connect. The wheel stops. The falling object freezes. The world outside sees only the last available frame, held without progression. This stillness is not just a trick of light. It reflects the deep structure of general relativity. Einstein's theory tells us that time is relative, and near extreme gravity, it slows compared to regions farther away. At the horizon, the difference becomes infinite. No amount of waiting allows the outside observer to see the object cross. It remains, in their view, poised at the edge, timeless. This reveals that time itself is not absolute, but bound to the shape of space. Where the geometry curves into infinity, time for others halts. One might ask what it means for reality when one observer sees time continue and another sees it stop. This dual view exposes time as relational rather than universal. Baker's frozen droplets show the same principle in miniature. His perception froze while others in the room saw water continue to fall. Both accounts were true, shaped by the limits of their frames. In black holes, the stakes are higher, but the lesson is the same. Time is never a single shared stream. It is always tied to perspective and to the structures that shape perspective. The event horizon is therefore not only a physical boundary, but also a perceptual one. It tells us as much about how we see as about what is. For the outside observer, it defines a surface of frozen moments, like a cosmic photograph that never updates. For the infalling traveler, it hides nothing, just another step forward. This split reflects the way boundaries work in both mind and universe. They are thresholds where time, motion, and continuity can no longer be taken for granted. In this sense, The horizon and the droplet stand as mirrors of each other. One is vast, created by collapsed stars and infinite gravity. The other is small, a product of neurons misfiring in the human brain. Both, however, show the same principle, that geometry, whether neural or cosmic, can stop the flow of time. In the droplet, the snapshot lasts seconds. In the horizon, it lasts forever. The shape holds the frame, and time stands still. The story of shapes that halt time comes together when we place Simon Baker's frozen droplets beside Alex Gardner's triangular diagrams of spacetime. One belongs to the scale of a hospital bathroom, the other to the depths of a collapsing star. Yet both reveal the same fact: geometry can stop the flow of time, either in the mind or in the universe itself. Baker's aneurysm caused his brain to lose its ability to stitch frames into motion. The droplets from a showerhead became suspended points of water, each held in its place as though reality had lost its rhythm. Gardner's triangles describe how past, present, and future may coexist inside the geometry of a black hole. They suggest that at the event horizon, motion toward the future appears to freeze for anyone watching from outside. The link is not accidental. In both cases, perception depends on frames. For Baker, the brain generates those frames, relying on neural circuits in areas like V5 to project motion. When the circuits failed, the frames fell apart, leaving only stillness. For Gardner, the frames belong to spacetime itself, carved by gravity's curvature. At the edge of a black hole, the frames stretch so far apart that they lose contact. To an external observer, there is no motion left to record. Both moments, Baker's bathroom vision and Gardner's cosmic boundary, demonstrate how geometry shapes the experience of time. The difference is intention. Baker's droplets were an accident, a failure of biological machinery. Gardner's diagrams, by contrast, were deliberate constructions designed to reveal hidden truths about relativity. This contrast helps us see how time-stopping geometries can be either accidental or designed. When an aneurysm interrupts perception, the freeze comes uninvited. When an artist paints a still life, the freeze is purposeful. In both, the shape of the scene holds time in place. Art has long experimented with these freezes. In a still life, fruit, glass, or bread sits forever unchanged, immune to decay. Painters use geometry, the arrangement of objects, the balance of light, to suspend the passing of time. In slow-motion cinema, the trick is even closer to Baker's experience. A splash of water elongates into a sequence of droplets, each visible, each detached. What normally passes in an instant becomes a collection of frozen instants. The audience watches what Baker once saw without choice: the disassembly of motion into static pieces. Architecture adds another example. Domes and arches create spaces where time feels held back. A visitor entering a cathedral often speaks of a sense of stillness, not because clocks stop, but because the geometry imposes a frame that suspends ordinary rhythm. Sound echoes longer, light lingers in stained glass, and scale shifts perception. The design works as a time-stopping shape, not through illusion alone, but through careful control of space and perspective. When these human-made examples are placed beside cosmic and neurological cases, a pattern emerges. Whether intentional or accidental, whether on the scale of neurons or galaxies, shapes can halt perception of time. The link is the role of framing. In perception, frames are the packets of sensory data the brain stitches together. In physics, frames are the coordinates of space-time events. In art, frames are the chosen boundaries of the scene. When frames break, stretch, or close, motion dissolves, and time appears still. This invites a philosophical question. Is time itself continuous, flowing like a river? Or is it always a sequence of perceptual shapes? Physics offers no simple answer. Relativity shows that time depends on the observer, bending with velocity and gravity. Neuroscience shows that the brain creates the flow of time by assembling fragments. Art shows that by arranging forms, one can give or deny the impression of movement. Across all three, continuity is not guaranteed. Instead, time may be nothing more than the successful joining of frames. Consider a row of film stills. Each frame is complete in itself, and the motion comes only when the frames are stitched and projected. When the projection stops, each frame remains, but the flow vanishes. Baker's vision was a glimpse of life reduced to film stills without the projector. Gardner's horizon is a cosmic version of the same halt, where the projection of spacetime breaks down for the outside viewer. A painting is a frame chosen to remain fixed, forever a single instant. The possibility follows that time halts not in clocks, but in geometry. A clock counts seconds, but the sense of flow depends on shapes, whether neural circuits, gravitational curves, or painted surfaces. When these shapes fail, bend, or settle into balance, time does not flow. It becomes a hidden structure of frames, sometimes aligned into motion, sometimes broken into stillness. The droplets in Baker's shower and the horizon of a black hole are not opposites. They are examples of the same principle, revealed in different contexts. Thematic synthesis shows us that perception and reality are not separate. Geometry binds them. The brain's loops, the artist's canvas, the architect's dome, and the black hole's event horizon all converge on a single fact. Time can be stopped by form. This does not mean time itself ceases to exist, but that its passage is always mediated through shapes. The shapes may be neurons firing, water drops suspended, triangular diagrams mapping gravity, or brushstrokes holding fruit in place. Philosophy has long asked whether time exists outside of perception or only within it. The examples across neuroscience, art, and physics suggest a middle path. Time is neither an unbroken flow nor an illusion. It is a product of frames held by geometry. To move through time is to cross these frames, one after another. To stop time is to arrest the frame, whether by accident, design, or cosmic law. The essence of time is not its measurement, but the shapes that allow it to appear at all. In this light, the final reflection is clear. Time halts not in the ticking of clocks, which only mark intervals, but in geometry. It halts in the hidden frames of perception, in the droplets caught in air, in the triangles of spacetime, in the still lifes that never decay, in the domes that seem eternal. Where geometry closes the frame, time stands still. Where geometry opens the frame, time flows. The shape that stops time may appear in a hospital bathroom or at the edge of a star, but the principle remains. Time belongs to shapes, and when shapes halt, so too does time.